Talia wiped her hands on her apron as her cousin's words echoed in her mind like poison. You? Married? Maybe if blind men become billionaires. She had smiled then, not because it didn't hurt, but because she knew something they didn't. And when the man at table 7 stood up in front of the entire restaurant, the silence was deafening. Talia lost her parents when she was just a little girl, and after that, she went to live with her aunt. Life in that house wasn't easy. Her cousins wore nice clothes, shiny shoes, and ate the best food. But Talia? She always wore old, torn clothes that were passed down to her. At family dinners or when guests came, she wasn't allowed to sit and eat like the others. She had to serve food with a quiet smile, standing in the corner, pretending not to be hungry. When the food was finished, she would clean up while her cousins laughed and chatted like princesses. But late at night, when everyone was asleep, Talia had a little secret. She would take out a small notebook from under her bed, one she had hidden from everyone. In it, she wrote stories, beautiful stories, full of places she had never been and people she had never met. Her dreams lived in that notebook. She wrote about being free, about being someone who mattered, about love and hope and strength. It was the only thing that made her feel alive. No one in the house knew about it, and even if they had, they would have laughed. They always said, "Girls like you don't get to dream big." But Talia never stopped. Even if they called her names, even if they made her feel small, she kept writing quietly, believing, just a little, that maybe her stories mattered. Maybe one day someone would read them and see her for who she truly was. Not the girl who always ate last, but the girl who never gave up. The day her cousin Lona got married was supposed to be a happy one, but for Talia, it felt like just another reminder that she didn't belong. She had no fancy dress of her own, so she borrowed one from a neighbour. It was old and a little too loose, but it was all she had. Her shoes weren't from any shop. She had made them herself from leftover fabric and glue. She tried her best to smile and look decent, even though deep down, she felt out of place among all the shining clothes and bright jewellery. At the wedding reception, people were laughing, dancing, and enjoying themselves. Talia stayed close to the wall, helping when she could, trying not to get in anyone's way. She quietly took a plate of food and sat at the corner of a table, hoping to blend in. Then someone stood up, holding a glass, and cracked a joke loud enough for the whole hall to hear. "Let's not waste too much food tonight. It's not like Talia's ever going to invite us to her own wedding." The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel. It filled the hall like a slap. Even Lona, the bride, laughed without thinking. Talia froze for a second. Her face burned, but her eyes didn't water. She looked at all of them, people she had grown up with, people who never missed a chance to remind her that she was different, less, unwanted. For a moment, it felt like the walls were closing in. The sounds of music and chatter faded, and everything became quiet in her mind. She didn't say a word. She didn't defend herself or ask them to stop. She just smiled gently, stood up and walked away from the table. But as she walked past the crowd, her heart whispered something louder than any insult. They'll remember today, but not for the reason they think, because deep down, Talia knew that her story wasn't going to end with that joke. She knew she wasn't just some poor girl in handmade shoes. She was more than that, more than their words, their laughter, their judgment. She was building something quietly, something stronger than their laughter. One day, the same people who mocked her would remember that moment, not as a joke, but as the day they failed to see the greatness in the girl they laughed at. And that thought gave her peace. Talia worked at a small but beautiful restaurant, tucked away in a quiet part of town. It was the kind of place where important people came, businessmen, influencers, families who spoke in soft voices and wore expensive clothes. But Talia, she was just the server, the girl in the plain black uniform who moved quietly from table to table, serving food, clearing plates, and disappearing into the background. Most people never even looked at her face. Some didn't say thank you. To them, she was invisible. She'd gotten used to it, being unnoticed, being the one who always smiled even when her feet hurt, even when her heart was tired. Every day was the same. Smile, serve, clean, repeat. Until one afternoon, everything changed. He came in around lunchtime and took a seat at table 7. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't come with anyone, just a calm man with kind eyes and a soft expression. When Talia went over to hand him the menu, he looked up and smiled. Not the fake smile people usually gave, but something warmer. He didn't even open the menu. Instead, he said, Bring me whatever you'd recommend and sit with me while I eat. Talia froze. For a moment, she thought she'd heard wrong. Sit. With a customer? That had never happened. No one ever asked her opinion on food, and definitely no one ever asked her to sit down. She looked around nervously, thinking it might be a joke or a mistake. But the man didn't laugh. He just smiled again and said, "If that's okay with you." She nodded slowly, her heart beating fast. She quickly brought him her favorite dish, something simple but full of flavor. Then she pulled a chair slightly away from the table and sat at the edge, unsure of what to do. But he didn't make her feel weird. He started talking, asking about the food, the place, the books on the nearby shelf. He even asked if she liked to read or write. No one had ever cared to ask her those things. As he ate, they talked. Just normal things. But for Talia, it felt special. For once, she wasn't just a server. She was someone with thoughts, opinions, stories. When he finished, he stood up and said something she wouldn't forget. "Thank you. You're not where you belong, but I think you're going somewhere." Then he left. No name, no number, just a kind stranger at table 7. But that one meeting lit a small fire in her heart. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. After that first unexpected meeting, something unusual began to happen. Every Thursday, just after lunch, Koa came back to the restaurant, always alone, always quiet, and always choosing table 7. He didn't need a menu anymore. Instead, he'd smile at Talia and say, "Surprise me." And she would. Every week, she brought him something different, something she liked, something she thought he might enjoy. But it wasn't really about the food. It was about the time they shared. Koa would always ask her to sit with him, just for a few minutes. At first, she was shy and unsure, but slowly, she began to look forward to those moments. They talked about simple things, like favorite books, music, and memories. Koa was calm, gentle, and kind. He never looked down on her, never made her feel small. He asked about her dreams, about her writing, and about what she wanted from life. Talia found herself telling him things she had never told anyone, how she wrote stories late at night, how she wanted to study creative writing, how everyone always told her those dreams were silly. But Koa never laughed. He listened with quiet interest, and each time he left, he said the same thing. "You're not where you belong, Talia, but I think you're going somewhere." She didn't understand what he meant. How could he believe in her like that? She was just a server. She didn't have money or connections or even the time to chase big dreams. But somehow his words stayed in her mind, repeating over and over like a soft song. Then, one Thursday, something was different. Koa came in, as usual, smiled, ate, talked, and then stood up to leave. But before walking out, he placed a small envelope on the edge of the table. He didn't say anything about it, just gave her one last look and said, "See you next week." When she opened it later that night, her hands shook. There was no name inside, no long message, just a line from one of her favorite books written across a card, and a check, a big one, enough to cover a full writing course abroad, enough to change her life. Talia stared at it for a long time. Her chest felt tight, her eyes filled with tears. He believed in her, more than anyone ever had, and for the first time, maybe she believed a little too. Maybe, just maybe, she really was going somewhere. Talia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the small envelope in her hands. It had no name on it, no sender address, just a single sentence written on the front in soft, neat handwriting. It was a quote from her favorite book, one she had read so many times, she knew it by heart. Her heart was beating fast, her hands slightly shaking. She slowly opened the envelope, unsure of what she would find inside. When she looked inside, her eyes widened. There was a check, a real check, with a huge amount written on it, enough to cover everything for the writing course abroad she had once mentioned to Koa. Along with it, there was a small note that simply said, "Apply, you belong there." Her throat tightened. She couldn't believe it. Koa had done this for her, quietly, without asking anything in return, without making a big scene. He had listened when no one else did. He had remembered her dream, and then gone out of his way to make it possible. Talia clutched the check and lay down, the envelope still in her hand, her eyes filled with tears. No one had ever believed in her like that. No one had ever shown her that kind of faith, that kind of love, not even her own family. And here was a man who had only known her for a few months, who had sat with her once a week, and yet he had seen her. But the next morning, Talia made a decision that surprised even herself. She put the check back into the envelope, closed it gently, and slid it under her bed, not because she didn't want to go, not because she didn't feel grateful, but because deep in her heart, she wanted to do it her way. That afternoon, she went back to work as usual. Koa came in, smiled like always, and sat at table 7. When she served him his food, she placed the envelope beside his plate. He looked at her, confused. She smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you, but I want to earn it. I need to know I got there on my own." Koa didn't argue. He simply looked at her with something that felt like quiet respect and nodded. He didn't seem hurt or upset, just proud. Talia didn't keep the money, but she kept the moment, that feeling that someone saw her, believed in her, and wanted her to win. And with that strength, she started saving, writing more, and working harder than ever before. Because now, she wasn't just dreaming, she was preparing. It had been months since Talia last saw her cousin Lona, the same Lona who once laughed at her at a wedding. But now, Lona was back in town. This time, things were different. Her marriage had fallen apart, and she had returned not just broken, but bitter. Her eyes no longer sparkled with joy. They carried something colder, sharper. And when she found out Talia was working at the same restaurant where once she had served tables, she decided to make her presence known. Lona planned a big dinner party and chose the very restaurant where Talia now worked, not just as a server, but as a respected trainer for new junior chefs. Talia had come a long way. She had worked hard, earned respect, and finally had a small place of her own in the kitchen. But Lona didn't care about any of that. She came to show off, to remind Talia of her place. That night, the restaurant was full. Lona walked in with her head high, wearing flashy clothes and a loud attitude. She laughed too hard, talked too loud, and made sure everyone noticed her. Talia stayed calm, focused on her work, quietly instructing the younger staff in the kitchen. But then, Lona asked to speak with her. She insisted Talia bring out a dish herself. Talia walked to the table, holding the plate with steady hands, even though her heart felt heavy. And just as she placed the dish in front of her cousin, Lona smirked and said loudly, "Still in aprons? Girl, even dishwater gets a ring before you." The table burst into laughter. Some people covered their mouths. Others looked away awkwardly, but Talia didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't let the words cut her like they once did, because at that moment, something happened. The door opened, and in walked Koa. Not just as a customer this time. He wore a crisp white shirt and was followed by a small group of well-dressed people, cameras, assistants, staff. The entire room shifted as heads turned and whispers began. Koa didn't look at anyone else. He walked straight toward Talia. Talia's smile returned, soft but full of quiet power, because she knew the tables were about to turn. And for the first time, Lona didn't look so proud anymore. As Koa stepped into the restaurant, everything around him seemed to pause. He wore a clean white shirt, his face calm but serious, and behind him followed a small group of people, camera crew, assistants, and sharply dressed staff. The clinking of glasses stopped. Conversations faded. Every eye in the room turned toward him. He wasn't just the quiet man from table 7 anymore. Something about his presence felt different, stronger, more important. Talia stood frozen near the kitchen entrance, still holding the tray from Lona's table. Her heart skipped a beat, but her face remained calm. She had no idea he was coming. She had no idea what was about to happen. Koa walked confidently past all the tables, straight toward her. People moved aside, whispering as they tried to figure out who he was. Some even pulled out their phones. He didn't greet anyone, didn't stop for small talk. His eyes were focused only on Talia. When he reached her, he smiled gently, the same smile she had seen every Thursday, but now it felt heavier, filled with meaning. He looked around the room, then turned to the guests and said clearly, "I'm not here for the food." Everyone went quiet. Even Lona looked confused. The entire restaurant, from the kitchen staff to the fanciest guests, waited for his next words. Koa took a deep breath and continued, "I'm here for the woman who made my Thursday nights worth living. The woman who gave me stories with every dish. The one who made me believe in dreams again." Gasps echoed through the hall. People stared at Talia. Some even smiled. Others just blinked in surprise. Koa then reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. But when he opened it, there wasn't a ring inside. It was a single silver key. He held it out to her and said, "I've built something. A publishing house. A space for voices like yours." And I don't want to run it alone. I want you to be the first to bring it to life. Talia's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She didn't run or hide. She just stood there, steady, proud, and a little in shock. Lona, who only minutes ago had laughed at her, now sat in silence, her face pale. For Talia, everything had changed, not because of a man or a gift, but because someone finally saw her worth and helped her shine. And this time, she wasn't just serving dessert. She was the reason they came. The room was still silent when Koa gently placed a small velvet box on the table in front of Talia. Everyone watched, expecting something traditional, maybe a proposal, maybe a ring. But when he opened the box, it wasn't a ring at all. Inside was a simple silver key, shiny and elegant, resting quietly in the soft fabric. People looked at each other in confusion. Lona leaned forward, trying to see what was inside. Her eyebrows pulled together as she whispered, "A key." She didn't understand, but Koa knew exactly what he was doing. He looked at Talia with warm eyes and spoke clearly, so everyone could hear. "I've built a publishing house," he said. "A real one. A place for voices that the world ignores. A home for stories that deserve to be heard." Then he paused, letting his next words settle in slowly. "But I don't want to run it alone. I want you, Talia. You, the girl who never stopped writing when no one believed in her. I want your voice, your vision, your heart in every part of it." The room gasped softly. Heads turned. Talia's name passed through the air like a wave. Even people who had never paid her attention before now looked at her differently. Lona, still holding her fork, suddenly dropped it with a loud clink. Her face froze. She didn't blink. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Talia, the same Talia they once laughed at, the same girl they said would never amount to anything, the one who wore borrowed dresses and made her own shoes. Talia stood quietly. Her face was calm, but her eyes sparkled with something strong. She looked down at the key for a moment, then looked back at Koa. She didn't need to say anything. Her silence spoke louder than any words ever could. She reached for the key, held it in her hand, and straightened her shoulders. Then, without a single glance at Lona or anyone else in the room, she walked forward, past the table, past the whispers, past the memories of every insult and every moment she was made to feel small. She didn't look back, because this time she wasn't walking away in shame or sadness. She was walking into something she had built with her own strength, and the world, finally, was watching. Talia stood with the key in her hand, surrounded by people waiting to hear her say, yes. Many thought this would end like a love story from the movies, with a proposal, happy tears, and a ring on her finger. But Talia surprised them all. She didn't cry, she didn't blush, and she didn't say, yes. Instead, she looked at Koa and said, calmly and clearly, "If we're building something together, I want to see a contract." The room went quiet again, not from shock, but from respect. She wasn't asking for flowers or promises. She was asking to be treated as an equal, as a partner, not just in his life, but in something that could change other lives too. Koa smiled proudly. He understood her heart. This wasn't just about love. It was about purpose. Weeks passed, and then something beautiful happened. Across social media, in magazines, and on TV screens, the world saw the launch of something brand new, a platform for unheard African women writers, a space filled with real voices, real pain, real dreams. At the center of it stood two names, Koa and Talia. But this time, Talia wasn't hiding behind anyone. She wasn't in the kitchen, in the corner, or in the shadows. She was right in front. The photos showed her standing tall, holding a mic, speaking with power. Reporters called her a fresh voice, a changemaker, a queen in her own lane, not because she wore a crown on her head, but because she carried one in her heart. And then, one quiet morning, an application came through the platform. It was from Lona, the same cousin who once mocked her, the same woman who laughed loudly in front of others, who believed Talia would never make it. Lona had written a short piece, hoping to be published on the new platform. Maybe she thought time had erased the past. Maybe she hoped Talia would forget. She didn't. But she didn't choose revenge either. A few days later, Lona received a letter. It was polite, professional, and short. The platform wasn't accepting her work at that time. At the bottom, the signature read, "Madam Talia Koa, co-founder." No anger, no harsh words, just a quiet message. Talia had walked away from pain and built something better. She didn't walk out with a ring that night. She walked out with a future. Years had passed, but Talia's story was still being told. not by gossiping neighbors or mocking cousins, but by people who now saw her as a symbol of quiet strength. One day, she was invited to speak at a big women's summit. The room was filled with powerful women, students, leaders, dreamers. Cameras flashed, lights glowed, and the stage was hers. She walked up calmly, wearing a simple dress, no need to prove anything. The crowd quieted as she held the mic, but she didn't rush. She took a deep breath, smiled softly, and then began. She didn't talk about being chosen by some man. She didn't talk about how lucky she was. Instead, she looked across the room and said, "I wasn't chosen. I wasn't lucky. I was just ready." The words hit like lightning, but soft, strong, real. Someone from the audience asked her how she had managed to survive all the rejection, the insults, the whispers that said she wasn't enough. Talia didn't blink. "Pain built my patience," she said gently. "Silence shaped my strength. And love didn't rescue me. It recognized me." And that was the moment everything changed. The crowd stood, slowly at first, then all at once. Applause filled the room, not just for her words, but for everything she had become. In the front row, Koa was sitting quietly. He didn't wave or try to take credit. He didn't even stand. He just smiled, because he knew the truth. He didn't create her. He just saw her. And the world finally did too. If you've ever been told you're not enough, remember, you don't need to fight to be seen. Just grow until you can't be ignored. Share this if you're choosing self-worth over validation today.